want to welcome everybody to this event organized by the Center for Christian Studies. My name is Alan Lai. I am the principal of the center. And tonight I will facilitate, but also participate in this interesting topic. And the school is located in Winnipeg. We are on Treaty 1 land and the home of the Métis. We are a national theological school grounded in the tradition of diaconia. We prepare people for ministries in the United Church of Canada and the Anglican Church of Canada and offer lifelong learning for anyone who wants to deepen their faith in actions. And we train passionate and skillful leaders who emerge from the edges to engage in ministry that lives in the world. And for people who want to explore what diaconal ministry is about, or just wanting to experience an adult honoring way of theological learning, we have a learning circle called Learning on Purpose coming up from June 19th to 30th. That is in person in Winnipeg. You don't need to commit yourself to become a minister in order to take these 2 weeks intensive courses, and most of them are just 1 week intensive courses. So you may go online to find us out. So let me welcome all of you again to this exciting event where we have friends to share their thought, but eventually all of you will be given opportunity to engage on the question, who is Asian? So our panelists are Emo Yango, Sandy Hwang, Hyerim Park, and myself. And the design of this an hour, maybe an hour and a half max, no more than that, is that you will hear the panelists addressing the question, are you Asian? Or you turn that around, who is Asian? Then I would say about half an hour, give and take. Then we will go into breakout room for you to participate in this conversation. And I will give you some little bit of guidance about when you go into that room, what to expect, what to talk, or you can already have tons of questions. Feel free to bring that in too. Then we will come back and have some concluding thought of for this evening. So I just mentioned the panelist name, but I would like to give each one of them a very brief introduction about yourself. Say who you are, where you are, and what you are doing. Just to begin, we are not talking about the subject yet. So, Emo.
Hi, good evening to everyone. It's 7 o'clock here in Toronto. So the name is Emo, the Admission Cluster Team of the Church in Mission Unit at the General Council Office here in Toronto. I'm from Treaty 13, currently known as Scarborough at the east end of Toronto. In the current framework of the new strategic plan of the United Church, I'm also the growth activity lead for creation of the diaspora, migrant intercultural communities of faith, and justice activity lead for Indigenous racial youth scholars program. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sandy?
Good afternoon and good evening to everybody. My name is Sandy, and I'm a current student at the Vancouver School of Theology and also a candidate for ordination in the United Church of Canada. I was born in Kaohsiung, Taiwan, and I've looked it up there. It's the land of the Macatao people, and my family immigrated to Canada just a few days before I turned 11. And since then, I've been living in Vancouver, which is the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples for the past 27 years. And I'm excited to be talking about this topic with you today. And I guess we'll be sharing more a little bit later. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Hyerim.
Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hyerim Park. I'm a student at the Center for Christian Studies and St. Andrews College as well. I'm supposed to be in Winnipeg, but I'm on my vacation. I'm in Las Vegas now. I was at the Joshua Tree National Park last night. I moved to Las Vegas to get access to internet for this event. I'm so happy to be part of this event, and maybe I forgot to tell you about myself. I'm Korean, and I immigrated to Canada around 4 or 5 years ago. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you. So, well, let us begin this conversation or this topic about who is Asian. It started as a kind of a fun conversation that I had with Emo in Toronto. But how about we just start that way? Emo, if I ask you, are you Asian? Tell me what do you hear and what do you want to start with, like this, to address this question?
Thanks, Alan. Let me start by giving a sense of when do I hear the term Asian? And normally I hear it from the media, from Western-dominated spaces, and when there's political or big sports solidarity gatherings like ASEAN or Southeast Asian Games or Asian Games over in the continent of Asia. But primarily, otherwise, I hardly use the term myself personally. See, in Asia, we refer to cultural identity. We don't introduce myself as an Asian, but I introduce myself by my cultural heritage or regional identity. I would never introduce myself as Asian, though, to anyone who is from the continent of Asia. The issue with me with the term Asian, and this is to go back to, eventually I will, in a short period of time, I will introduce myself more. It is used synonymously with ethnicity. And the term itself has no ethnic identity. The continent of Asia is home to a very diverse groups of people with diverse cultural heritage and languages. In fact, thousands of people groups in the continent of Asia. The Philippines alone is a 125 people group. Indonesia has 140 people group. Myanmar has 100 people group. China has 56 people group. Thailand has 70, and India has 705 people group. And when we talk about Asia, it includes Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and then Middle East. And we hardly really correlate Asia with Middle East. Now, then who I am? I am from the country called Philippines. And the Philippines is a colonial name given by colonizing Spaniards to the archipelago located in the southeast corner of the continent of Asia. So Filipino is not an ethnicity, but a colonial identity to me. My ancestors are Ilocano from the northern part of the country, named after the King of Spain in the name of Spanish colonization. So think of it like we're living in Canada. Canada is a colonial name for a country given by not the indigenous people by themselves, by some people coming from the outside. So who is Asian? I am a person from the continent of Asia, but I don't necessarily introduce myself as Asian. So when it comes to hearing anti-Asian racism, the first thing comes to mind is, who are they referring to? Who's experiencing racism? Chinese descent, Korean descent, Japanese descent? I can even say Indonesian descent, because Indonesia, again, 1,000+ people group. Are they from Sulawesi? Are they from the main island Java? So those are the things that comes to my mind when I hear the word Asian. So I'm from the Asian continent of Asia, and that's all I can say as close as possible. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much for, we'll talk more about the idea of Filipino, right? So you will have something more to say. Let's go to Sandy about yours. You already mentioned that you are from Taiwan. Say a little about how would you respond or address this idea that are you Asian when people ask you, are you Asian?
So because I am from Asia, so I do consider myself as an Asian as an umbrella term. But at the same time, I normally wouldn't say I'm Asian just outright. I would identify that I was born in Taiwan. I'm a Taiwanese Canadian, and I'm ethnically Chinese, but my father is from a subgroup called the Hakka people. So that's a subgroup of Han Chinese. But recently I'm realizing in Taiwan, there's so many indigenous people, so many indigenous groups, and there's a lot of intercultural marriage back then. So like I have to do a genetic test to see what other heritage I have. But in general, I do consider myself as Asian, just because it's easier, because I can't identify every single part of the ethnicity in me right now.
Thank you. And then Hyerim.
Yeah, like Emo and Sandy already explained about the being Asian. Like for me, I consider myself as Asian, but I usually say I'm Korean. It's much easier to explain about myself because Asia, there are around 50 countries in Asia. So like Emma already explained, that there are so many diverse heritage and language and cultures among Asian countries. But for me, as a Korean, I have my own Korean identity, my own language, culture, and other so many dynamic aspects myself. And Korean Peninsula is connected to Asian continent, and is bordered by China to the west and Japan to the east. So that's the geographically location. But yeah, actually Korea is there, and I'm Korean, also Asian.
Thank you so much. I think we are good. This is an introduction. It's just a warm-up exercise, right? We are so polite here, but we will hear each other and how we see each other. I mean, yeah, we'll remember that we will address that question. But for myself, I was born and raised in Hong Kong, and so it's very interesting. Like people had their different way to wanting to know who I am, and there's so many ways I could respond to the question, who are you, or are you Asian, or are you Chinese? So I am Chinese, of course, I'm Chinese, but I was born and raised in Hong Kong when Hong Kong was not part of China, and it was colonized by the British, and I was not a British citizen. So I was not a mainland China Chinese citizen, and I was not a British citizen either. So I was none of the above, but I am Chinese. And so when I'm here in Canada, it depends on who I'm talking to. I say I am Chinese. I am, right now, there's a term called Hong Kongers. That's a newer term for the past few years. So you can say I'm a Hong Kongers. I am Canadian. I am Chinese Canadian, Chinese-Canadian. I am Canadian with Chinese heritage. There are so many ways, so many responses, depends on who I'm talking to, and maybe get a sense of why you ask and go from there. So because there are so many variations, so many names and can be used. So that is the way to begin. So I would like, this is like, we can unmute ourselves if you want. There's no like a particular order, but just to say more about this identity interesting thing, because when I was talking to Emo, because I know that he's from a country we call Philippines. Now we know that now the term is already given to them by the colonizer. So because depends on how people understand Asia. So are they, because it's so often are heavily dominated by certain countries, like China, maybe Japan, or others. So people like the Filipinos, even people from Thailand, it is kind of interesting. Like, that's why I asked Emo, are you Asian? So he tell me something that's what he already talked about, becomes very interesting. Maybe, explore more. Like, so then who are you? How do you talk among, your peers, yourself? How do you introduce yourself, that kind of thing?
I would introduce myself in Canada. I don't even introduce who I am. In terms of my nationality, in terms of my ethnicity, or in terms of my cultural heritage. I claim to be, I don't like the term Filipino because it's colonial, but for a lack of a better term, I'm Filipino Canadian. That's a term given to me, identity given to me in Canada by the dominant power. Except for myself, I reject that term Filipino, mainly because of the history of that. And again, I come, my cultural and my national history is different from, say, Sandy and Hyerim. And so I think that's particularity is what I want to recapture or read it for people to discover here in Canada. That when we talk about Asian, who are we really talking about and referring to? Because we're all different. And I think part of respecting us as people from the continent of Asia, that's one thing I want people to be educated and learn along the way. That yes, Philippines is a colonial name for a country. It is not the name that my ancestors called the place. In fact, there's no such thing as one big Philippines. It's only because of colonization and colonial desire that it's something like the Philippines became a nation.
I just want to highlight the Emo, your internet is kind of sometimes on and off, so that's why I missed something, but that's fine. So, anybody like Sandy, you can talk a bit more about the Taiwanese kind of situation while in Vancouver, that kind of experience. Maybe say a bit more about that background. And what people are expecting, what people may expect of you, like knowing that you also attend when you arrive, you attend English-speaking United Church. So you grew up in the United Church that way. So a little bit of that kind of expectation about you, or that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think immigration came in waves. My family came in the 90s. And I think during that time, there was a big wave of immigration from Taiwan. So I was fortunate enough to be going to high school with a group of kids like me who came when they were 10 or 11. So we both hold our heritage from Taiwan, as well as the experience of growing up in Vancouver. So that was quite a blessing to have, because I know a lot of people don't have that experience. If you're born here, then you grow up with like the dominant culture here. If you come here much later, then you're kind of more accustomed to your culture from the country that you came from. So it's unique. I'm kind of like an in-between culture type of person. And so I definitely always identified as Taiwanese, but also I am a Canadian, and I am really proud to be both. Right now, we need to be recognizing that we're all living on stolen lands, and so I recognize that we have to do more reconciliation work. Even though as an immigrant, I am proud to be a Canadian, and I'm also proud to have my heritage living here. And sorry, I forgot what other part to your question. Yeah.
Well, that's good. It just like this is the time where we're fully commenting on these issues, the identity mixed that kind of scenario. And so Hyerim, maybe you want to add something to that area?
Yeah, about identity. When some people meet me for the first time, they ask me, "Where are you from?" Then I say, "I'm from Korea." Then are you from North Korea? No. Then it's or some people just ask me, "Are you from China?" Or some Chinese people speak to me Chinese that I didn't even understand. So I'm thinking about my just appearance whenever they saw me at first, then there's some kind of assumption that I might be Chinese or kind of something. But it is, I think, I really like to say that I'm from Korea. Then because that's who I am. That's what I have with a Korean identity. Yeah.
Maybe I'd add to that is that because this is the month of Asian Heritage Month, and sometimes in the years past that we always like think of something to do or something to offer, and there was some expectation that that there'll be something like this one, like be offered, but we kind of organized this late because sometimes I have this feeling that what is this Asian Heritage Month for? Sometimes it is like to encourage the Asian, whatever Asian, communities to celebrate. But sometimes I have a feeling that it is not, we don't feel the need to celebrate. Sometimes it is just kind of a pressure for us to offer something to what we can celebrate any time of the year, but then how then we need to do something special for this month, but also giving the fact that there are genuine people wanting to know and to learn the diversity among ourselves. And that's why this idea of sharing how we see ourselves as Asians or Asian or Chinese, whatever identity, that kind of thing. But let's us go into this part where how we see one another, because that might be an interesting conversation for some people to hear. Like in Hong Kong, and I know that there are many other parts of Asia, it's the same. Like in Hong Kong, we have a lot of Filipinos, so-called domestic servants, coming to work in Hong Kong. And in the weekends, you can see them occupied almost all of our parks and all the public spaces where they have groups gathering and party and picnic. So that becomes an interesting phenomenon to observe. Now that becomes interesting, like we are all, well, so many names, Canadians, Taiwanese Canadian, Chinese Canadian, Koreans, and all Filipinos, that there are lots of variations among us. How do we see one another? How do Filipinos, may I still use that term, because I have no idea what other term to call them. How do they see Hong Kong? How do they see Chinese? Or how Chinese see Filipinos? Or how Koreans, because like in Korea, there are Chinese community in Korea, same thing with Chinese community in, so maybe say a little bit about how we see one another. I know the Emo might have something to contribute in this area.
When we start talking about migrant people, Filipinos, and let me use that term very loosely, Filipino descent folks, we have been all over the global community, the global village, providing different services and working in different jobs sectors. But certainly in Asia, we have become part of, in the continent of Asia, we have provided a service, at least primarily people would have a stereotype the Filipinos as domestic helpers. And let me just put it that way, because there's no two way about it. And even during Canada, we had that stereotyping. And the problem with that is that if you start talking about Asians, well, I don't think these descent folks would be happy to be identified as domestic helpers. And so that's why I think it's really important that we, instead of just saying Asian, we identify the specific cultural group, cultural heritage, where somebody from the continent of Asia comes from. The truth is, when I did my DNA test, Sandy, 7% of me is from the island of Taiwan. Now, of course, that's from my ancestors way back. And so that would mean that would be from the indigenous peoples of Taiwan, not the Chinese folks who came to Taiwan and resided in Taiwan after World War II. And so there is that mixing already of different cultural groups or cultural heritage. And so it's just hard to just be identified. So it's just hard to be identified as Asian per se.
Right. Maybe Sandy, comment a little bit about this. You can say a little bit about Chinese, but Chinese and Taiwanese. I know that the two terms they're different, but it's very sensitive thing. But just say a little bit.
Yeah, it is a sensitive topic, and I actually don't really watch the news much, because it's just people just need to have power over people, and that just really bothers me. So, but I definitely, I think for people who were born in Taiwan, we feel very strongly that we don't want to be called Chinese. We do want to be called Taiwanese, because there's also a distinct culture as well. Taiwan is actually very diverse, and there's a good mix of influences from Japan and Korea as well. Japan colonized Taiwan for quite a few years, and now I also don't keep up with the Korean drama, but the Korean drama thing is really big, I think, in Taiwan and all over the world now too, right? So there is that influence as well. So yeah, I think politically, I don't want to comment too much, but it's just we do make the distinction that we're from Taiwan when we talk to people about where we come from.
Yes, that's an important comment for people who listen to this. Yes, that's a very important distinctions. Now, Hyerim, give you the last word before we go to the breakout room. We are commenting how we see one another, Chinese, Taiwanese, and then now Emo talk about China. You had, I think, in your country also have a fair share of some Chinese coming in, or you in other countries. How would you comment on that?
It's a little sensitive to say things. I mean, the relationships with China and Japan, because historically there's some historical political conflicts between Korea and China, and between Korea and Japan. So as a Korean, because I've learned a lot about the historical facts, so I always remember and have to remind myself of the historical facts. But aside from that, when I see some Chinese, Filipinos, Japanese, Taiwanese in Canada or wherever, I really feel familiar with them. I feel like I'm more tied to them. Like Emma said, I feel really tied to them because we are from Asian continent, and we share some similar cultures and I'm so familiar with their food and culture, even songs, movies. So yeah, personally, I feel like I more like to hanging around with Taiwanese, Japanese, Chinese people than European friends, honestly.
Wow, you're too honest. So this is the time that we would like to give the opportunity our folks to engage with us. We're going to the breakout room. I would like to say this. So like your thought on the panelist presentation, just have a conversation. The second would be, how are peoples from Asia different from each other? If you know something, share something. And then I have this, are there any cultural traits that people from Asia share? Could talk about that. How is this stereotypical when we only use the singular form of Asian? Now, this one is interesting. How should I understand it then when the media uses terms like anti-Asian racism, which was raised by Emo in the beginning? Who they were talking about when they say anti-Asian? And lastly, what are the questions, ideas you want to bring to the table? Okay, so it looks like well, at least get a sense of what they have talked about. That's great. Thank you so much. And I think I really welcome the idea, like just to highlight that the in-betweenness is a very interesting phenomenon. And there's certain, when earlier, talk about the model minority myth, that certain people, like the Asian people, are a kind, general, and hardworking, that kind of thing, and they will go with the flow. They won't rock the boats. They are, all kinds of like model minority thing. And in our preparation, I think Sandy and others also brought up like not just Asian, the model minority, but particularly something to do with Asian. Again, using very loosely the term Asian women. There's something myth, there's certain myth when they talk about like in the Western culture, when they think of or talk about Asian women, and maybe particularly Japanese women, or could be Korean women, that there's certain misconception or even myth, not true, the kind of understanding about them. So somebody highlight that men and women, they are not the same, even though they are from the same culture. That's the one. And just one last comment, which is basically a lot of us are the Asian people here are from the first generation immigrant. Like if we have a second generation or third, in a equal fashion, or even all about them, that would be a different feel about this topic, because it will be interesting to see what do they see themselves. Do they see themselves as Asians? Do they, like talking about my son, right? My son, my daughter, do they say I'm Chinese, or do they say I'm just Canadian? That will be interesting mix of things. But the next little while, I would go back to our panelists. So you also participated in the conversation. I would like to give you, which one of us, it's not final, but concluding, or like the last thought, or something that is on your mind, just to share with us. I go, Hyerim, where are you? I don't see you, but I know maybe you're here.
Me? So
I was talking about him, but never mind.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were Emo. Hyerim. Okay, no. Sorry. Go ahead. My apologies.
No. Go ahead. Well, Emo, then you go ahead.
Okay, just quickly, a couple of things. One is that if in honor of Asian Heritage Month, please use the word plural terms. It's plurality for us, for Asians. So Asian communities, Asian peoples, it's easier for us then to begin to hear that much. But at the same time, Alan talked about generations. second, third, fourth generations, their experiences will be different from the immigrant or the migrant generation. In fact, Kim, if I can use you as an example, Kim Uyedikai, who works for the Shining Waters, she's your fifth generation Japanese Canadian, but we shouldn't be using Japanese because it's your fifth generation now, but we still tend to do that, and that's okay. But what I'm saying is that when it comes to generations, the experiences have become different. And I think we just need to honor the plurality of that when we talk about Asian peoples.
Thank you. I don't know whether Kim want to respond and say a little bit.
I'll just say I'm fourth generation. My children are fifth, but my experience is being part of a collective, which in Western terms is called Asia. And I was saying in my group that the Asian community is very dispersed, and it's not one continent. It's many, many places of a continent, divided by land, by water, a lot of other things as well. But I'm still identifying with an Asian community when I'm with others, particularly women, but others as well. So it's part of who I am, and I can't deny that, and I can't whitewash it. And it's just who I am, and I need to claim that and name it and honor that because there's gift in being part of this wider Asian community.
Thank you, Kim. Sorry to put you on the spot, but not sorry, actually. Hyerim, are you still here?
Yes. Can you see me?
Yes, now, yes.
Good. I was so happy to be here today. And I learned a lot. And I just one thing I would like to share is just being friends with Asian people would be really wonderful. So please try to ask questions to your friends, Asian friends. If you are really interested in that person, that culture, you can ask questions and you can get knowledge, you can be friends, and that's what I want to encourage all of you. Thank you.
Thank you for the encouragement. I can learn how to do kimchi from you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sandy.
Yeah, I think it's already been brought up that we need to recognize the diversity in Asians and also recognize that experiences of people who have been here as a minority growing up compared to people who just came recently would be a lot different. And the gender thing as well, being a woman of color growing up in Canada is different from being a man growing up in Canada. So just recognizing the intersectionality that happens everywhere, and not everybody's experiences are the same. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, I guess this is the time that we envision to have, and of course, this topic is huge, and it has multiple layers. It all depends on the participants. Like we are talking about immigrants, the migrants, first generation, but also second, third, fourth. The dynamics difference. Just imagine if this panel, this in this room, are all people of Asian descent, but with different geographical locations. The conversation, I imagine, will be different. And also add to that mix will be, maybe if they were the migrant or the first generation mixed with the second, or just the second or the third and the fourth talk among themselves, what do you call yourself? That will be another fascinating conversation. So this is the kind of the things that we don't hear that often, except if you go to the university and study Asian studies, then maybe you will hear that kind of thing. But that's just say that it's a very rich conversation we experienced tonight. I'd like to thank you all the panelists. We are giving them a very short notice, and they all say yes. and also for Hyerim. She actually is traveling away from Winnipeg, so she said yes. And also thank you so much. And actually, for people to bring this conversation back to wherever your community is, and to keep, well, whatever, I'm sure that your geographical locations have different, diversities and people, that just hope that the conversation you have with them next time will be much more enriched and enjoyable. So thank you so much for coming, and thank you for attending this event. It has been a wonderful evening. I want to thank you so much for coming.